All right, I think we're ready to get started. Welcome everyone, hope you're doing well. Before we get to the approval of minutes, I did want to let everyone know we will probably get done a little early today. I did find out, Greg, after the agenda went out, Greg let me know that he wasn't going to be able to come at this time after all because he had a conflict, but the budget director, Josh Lovern, was supposed to come in his place. That was going to be fine. We all were excited to have Josh. Now Josh is very ill, so Josh is not here to save all of us, as I understand it. So we will do the budget in 2 weeks. So we will still have Greg come in and talk about that, and I think Linda will say a little bit about the board vote. We won't have that agenda item. So we have a little extra room to talk about other things if we need to, or we can just get out. So with that in mind, we have a motion to approve the minutes from October 7th. All right, Brian, motion. Do we have a second? Dr. Parker? Any further discussion on the minutes? Any notes or feedback?
Thank you for being so clear.
All those in favor of approving the minutes from October 7th, please indicate so by raising your hand. Wasn't it? I approve, yeah. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Anyone abstaining from the minutes? All right. Minutes passed, thank you. And yes, the furniture has changed. I don't know why or how.
Sociology experiment. I'll be back here.
President Shaw, what would you like to share with us today?
Thank you, Chair. Well, probably most importantly, we had a Board of Trustees meeting on Friday afternoon where they did approve the budget for this year. The budget that we presented included reductions of $2.4 million. We just have those in one line, and then we will work as the year goes by to assign those to the various areas. In keeping with the commitment I made to campus, we looked at a couple of different ways of allocating those reductions. The principles were to maintain academic excellence, maintain student services, and then try to increase efficiency, which means basically we're trying to take the cuts as much as possible out of operations and improving business processes and things like that. Well, we can't do it all there. I think the Greg's area is taking 1.4 million, 1.2 million in reductions. Academic affairs is taking about 870,000. My office is taking 90,000. I mean, we did it sort of proportional to people's budgets, roughly, but not exactly. Because if we had done it exactly, then academic affairs would have been taking a much bigger cut because academic affairs is half of our budget. So, all of that is, your provost has done a great job of meeting with the directors and finding vacant positions and positions that can be held for a little while. So that should be what you experience, right? I mean, there's not going to be, a hammer is not going to come down at somewhere in the future. If you've been told you're going forward with the search, you're going forward. If you've been told it's being held, it's being held. So you can go ahead and live your lives and not expect some other kind of awful thing to happen. We are not planning to reopen the contract. Kimball had said that there were some people concerned about that. That's not what we're doing for this year. What we will also start this year, though, and we'll start it probably, we've already started scheduling meetings with every academic division with me and the VPs to come in and talk about trends, demographic trends, to talk about the budget, and to talk about sort of things going forward, and really to give you and your colleagues a chance to ask us any question that you want to ask. Our goal is to be as open and transparent as possible about what we believe is happening, and to start talking with, to make sure you understand all of that and why we're in this situation, and then to start laying the groundwork to work together to make some transformations that will keep us from having to live in this kind of gradual demise. I do not want the university to be in a state of slow demise. But if we're not going to be in that state, then we need to think together about how we can transform in some areas. So we'll have those departmental meetings, or divisional meetings. Really, where you can help us is by really encouraging your colleagues to come to those meetings and ask questions. We find, I think, when people get the information and they have a chance to poke at it and stuff, it all makes more sense. What is more difficult is when people don't come and still have assumptions about what's going on. So help us by getting people out to those divisional meetings. And other than that, I'm going to be talking at the State of the University address on November 14th about this. I'll be putting together a presidential task force on financial sustainability. There'll be a big piece of that will require faculty involvement. And Sue and I are just beginning to sort of work that forward. So stay tuned on that. Any questions?
I have a question, and I'm sure you'll help correct me on my words if I don't have these right. Was part of the budget that was approved and shared with the board a sort of solid figure on what our balance was going in from last fiscal year to this fiscal year?
Yes, the fund balance.
The fund balance.
And part of what drives this is best practice for universities is a 40% fund balance. We've tried to have a 10% fund balance. Last year, we bit into that sum and the board approved it because I really didn't want us to have to take cuts, and I was hoping that enrollment would pick up. But I think we're seeing the impact of larger demographic forces. And so the board has agreed to let us go forward with an 8% fund balance. So that's what we're driving to this year and in future years. I'd love for us to build back more than that. We really need to. But I'm trying to balance, and we all are trying to balance between having that fund balance and making cuts that we think will be damaging to the institution. So that was very much a piece of it.
I'm sure it was. So you're saying that that's the goal for next year, the fall?
This year, the budget we put forward this year would have us in this year with a fund balance of 8%.
Okay, I guess what I'm really asking, maybe it's already been public knowledge, but what was it going from last year into this year?
2 years ago, it was 11.5%. Last year, I think we ended with 8.6% last year. We thought it was going to be lower, but we were able to close the year better than anticipated.
Okay,
So we were at 8.6%.
thank you.
Somebody else had a question? Yes?
Well, do you anticipate a hiring freeze if we don't have job announcements out there yet? Do you anticipate that?
So Cindy, if you've been planning to go forward with a search, we intend to go forward with those that we've agreed on. So I'm not planning on doing anything today moving forward. If your program has been planning on going forward per your director, then that would be the plan.
You know, we will continue to hire where we believe there is a strong need. I think what we all will do going forward is think about what we really need when we look at the demographic projections and when we look at lots of other factors, you know, how the workforce is changing, how the economy is changing, lots of things, so that we can think together about how do we reshape the institution to keep it strong but maybe doing things differently than we've done them in the past. And it's not code word for anything, I don't know what it might be, but I think part of it is, we're seeing fewer undergraduates, we're seeing more adult learners, we're seeing, there are some trends that, so we just need to have a good conversation about how are we gonna respond to that.
It seems to me, the solution always is more students. I mean, at what point do we just reach a sustainable level and go, hey, you know what? We want to have 6,500 students, and we want to bring these students in, and how do we maintain that? Because I mean, the answer always is more students. How are there other trends out there that show schools, maintaining, a certain level there and, maintaining the functions of the school?
Well, I think you're on to a really important point, Chad, and, part of the question I've thrown out there over the last couple of years is what size should we be?
Yeah.
And it's not just the size, it's the makeup of that population. Is it undergraduates, is it graduates, is it somebody else out there?
Yeah.
The Strategic Capital Development Plan that HEC did estimates that we'll be at 3,100 FTE by 2029. I think that's what the projection was. So they're predicting, given everything they know, that we're gonna shrink that much. So I wanna provide all that information to the campus, so everybody can look at these trends themselves, and we can think about whether we try to counter them, or whether we do just say, okay, that's the size we're going to be. Now, having said all that, we're confronted with a pay structure where we continue to increase pay and benefits, particularly PERS. I mean, you all know you've got cost of living increases of 4%, 0%, 4%, and others got 3%. But your PERS rates went up, this last year, I think it was up 25% what we're paying, for an overall somehow of about 11% in benefits. So we have rising costs like that we have no control over, and that's why it's like, well, how do you respond to that? Well, more students, right? You gotta have more revenue or fewer expenses. It's as simple as that. It's as simple and as difficult as that. So I'm pretty smart and I read a lot, but I need lots of other people helping me think about this and deciding what the campus has energy, and what I told the board on Friday was, I don't want to preside over a gradual demise. I'd much rather preside over a transformation. So let's all think together about how we need to transform to be sustainable and strong, and a place we can really be proud of and enjoy working and feel like we're doing good stuff. That's what we all want. Sorry, I knew Greg wasn't doing a budget presentation, so I could take a lot more time. Are there any other questions? Yes?
Is there like a magic dollar amount that would be out there that would be the ideal amount to earn or bring in?
Well, it depends on what you mean. I mean, if you mean in one-time funding, or, I actually don't know what the magic transformational gift would be, but we don't have any prospective donors right now that we know of that could give us that. The magic number would be for the university, for the state to get back to contributing 60 or 70% of the cost of education, as opposed to 25 to 30% of the cost of education. And I'm actually kind of hopeful in this political situation where every Democratic candidate pretty much is talking about doing something about how we finance higher education. At least it's a huge part of the conversation that we used to just say, we just wrote it off. We said the public is never coming back into public higher ed. And now it sounds like there may be increasing political will to bring public back into it. So that's a big potential answer. I don't know if it will actually happen. And the thing is, even if that happened, it might take 5 years before we begin to see some relief. So we do have to get through, and we don't know that it will.
Do you want to mention that Western's also,
Yeah, Western sent out an email, I think they're down, what, 9?
they're down
Down 4?
5% compared to fall 18. And with the current enrollment composition and updated revenue estimates, they're showing a shortfall of about 3 million, which is about 9% less than the amount budgeted, and about 1.4 million more in a decrease from what their board approved back in June. So I just thought you might want to mention that, because it's the fluctuation and the unknown trends that are.
Yeah, and they did not go forward asking for a tuition increase last year. So they are, they're struggling. One final thing, just to kind of put it all in perspective for you, and it's not, this is just an interesting way to look at the numbers. When you look at how much SOU gets from the state, it's about, right now it's about 22 million. Our OPE, our other personnel expenses, so our PERS, PEB, and other kinds of benefits that all of us get is about 20 million. So the other day, we quipped that the state wasn't really paying us to educate students. They're paying us to provide health care and retirement benefits to a set of people. And, I mean, that's just but it helps you switch your perspective a little bit in terms of what kind of funding they're actually providing and how it ends up getting used. I enjoy those benefits as much as anybody else, I want to be clear. We're all happy that we have those benefits. But I see Brittany back there nodding because she's well aware of these funding issues.
You have a question?
Yes?
Are we considering any other way to negotiate with the authorities, with the state, with the senators, with Congress?
Always.
Because
Yeah.
I think this approach is not working, just for, from the starting point, it doesn't make sense that we're trying to convince people that was benefited from higher education to fund higher education. So,
I agree, but it's, if you have an idea of how to change that,
I have no idea, so we can discuss further. but-
we go and talk to legislators all the time. And I can talk to them about 20 great things that SOU is doing or that our graduates are doing. And I get back, but why don't you accept the credits from community college? And I was like, did you hear anything I just said? And we say, we do, we accept 85% of the credits that are brought to us, but somehow, it's hard to dislodge, at least at the state level, some of the notions that they have. And rational argument does not necessarily hold sway.
I think it's important that you understand that it's not just President Schwab who's out there talking. There are so many other, people working on changing the message or changing the perception, which is generally a misperception, like the example that you just gave. But the other thing is, we did an analysis last year, and we essentially control 7 cents of every dollar that we have that belongs to us, which is not a lot of control, frankly.
I mean, the disinvestment in higher ed, if that's what you're talking about, Enrique, and that's been going on since the 80s. And it's actually part of a big political pendulum swing in this country. And gosh, everybody from higher ed has been trying to make headway and get that get that to change. But it's part of a perspective that individuals benefit from higher education, not the general society, and because individuals benefit, then individuals should pay for it. It's a very Republican perspective on the view of the country and what taxes should be for. But I'm hopeful that that is changing. And it's not just my job, it's everybody's job here to think about the 2020 election and what we're trying to, what might happen as a result of the 2020 election. I'd be happy to talk to you more individually. It appears from your face you still have questions, and I'd be happy to talk with you.
Yeah.
What could possibly be more entertaining than that? I'll be brief. The Transforming General Education Task Force has been meeting every week on Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. And I think we will be scheduling something in the way of an update this term for this group. So more on that. I think that was the idea, that the faculty would come and do updates. So I had to miss the meeting last week because of the board meetings, but I know that good conversations are happening, and that makes me happy. Tomorrow and Wednesday, you've seen emails on the Seamless and Future Ready Education Conference that the president has put together for many folks throughout the community, folks in politics, people in K through 12, people in education naturally beyond K through 12, and there's just a big array of people who will be involved with the facilitators of the conversation. KnowledgeWorks, which is a company that Linda's had some
It's a
experience with.
nonprofit out of Cincinnati.
And so there's great conversation happening both days. And then I think a few specialty groups are gonna meet with the facilitators for some conversations, or the presenters. The reason I wanted to mention it to this group is because at 12:30, if anyone who's interested in competency-based education wants to come talk with the folks who have expertise in that area, we can meet down with them in the Rogue River Room. It'll be after their presentation, their morning presentation. On Wednesday. And I've invited the general education group, chairs, directors, and a few other folks who've expressed interest in proficiency-based or competency-based education. So that'll just be an open conversation. Show up, bring your lunch, and we hope to see you. And then there's quite a few people. I don't remember what the final count is, but I saw a lot of folks
About 100 people
in this room.
100 people tomorrow, and then about 50 or 60 on Wednesday, I think. And tomorrow is K through 12, employers, us.
Business and
Yeah, and then,
nonprofit.
On
Legislators.
Wednesday, it's more educators. It's faculty and teachers, curriculum directors, and things like that. Really thinking about what is personalized education and what does that mean and how does it work. Come learn something that you may not know about, or if you do know about it, come help us all learn.
That's all I have.
Okay.
Because I thought that, I thought we had a packed agenda. We'll start trying to be mindful of that.
That's fine. All right, thank you.
Hello, everybody. Advisory Council met last Monday, and ordinarily, there's at least a little bit to tell you that you haven't already heard or you don't see on the agenda, but I think quite candidly, everything that we talked about is either on the agenda and will get further amplified, or some of the points, especially President Child, we knew we wanted to have finance on there because of the email that went out and so on, but that communication is going forward. We fully intended to have Greg here to talk to us about the budget, and apparently that's going to get delayed, but we'll get it in 2 weeks. Yeah, honestly, I think the only thing that we talked about that isn't automatically going to get talked about here, and it's really not a lot to tell you, is we did talk a bit more about the gen ed transformation that Provost Wall says that work is going forward, and I'm sure we're going to get reports. So I think the point that came up at the table was that we just need to keep everybody informed about why we're doing this, and what it is we're doing, and what our goals are, and so on. But, yeah, I don't have a lot.
The one thing on that too is just a reminder to everyone, if your program has not already discussed and responded to the prompt that was sent out about learning outcomes, please do so soon. As of the last conversation, on Friday, only 3 programs for the same division had responded. So everyone had till the end of the month, but we were really hoping to get responses as early as possible because right now the task force is a little bit spinning its wheels, hoping to start working on the feedback we get from the other programs. So. All right, Brittany.
So I have a couple things. I'll start with, I don't know if I said it in the last meeting, but just a quick recap. If you didn't know, I feel like you should know. We're kind of in the same situation budget-wise as the campus, except when we're talking about like getting more students, it also comes into the conversation for student fees of what type of student are we getting in, and for a lot of the shift, it's online students, and online students don't pay the student fee, which has really hurt our student fee funded programs. So last year, when there was a decrease in the number of students that came into the campus that paid the student fee, we were an expected $500,000 deficit by the end of the year. So we kind of just went around to our student programs and said, please don't spend this chunk of money because it's not there. Even though we told you it would be, it's not. So we ended the year with we're kind of sitting at a $213,000 deficit at the moment, which the way we funded our student fees for this year is part of our income was also supposed to be paying off the deficit. But we're down again in those who pay the student fee, so we now are going to go to our programs, and we're expecting about a 10% cut this year with this year's student fee programs. So we're trying to kind of like battle that, and again go with the same idea of how do we keep up our student fee programs on campus when there's probably, we're not going to get a jump in enrollment, but are we going to go down even more in students who actually pay our fee that funds our programs, which is everything in this building. So just a heads up for that one, the lights could be off or the building could be down. That's not funded. But there's a lot of awesome things that do keep students here, which is retaining students. It's a good thing to have those programs. So we're just trying to look at that right now. On the bright side, we changed our student fee process through our all ASSU meeting about 2 weeks ago. It was actually the day after I saw you last time, and it was passed through all ASSU to change our process. Just like a quick update on how it used to be is there was the student fee committee that handled our budget, right? And then it went to subcommittees, and each subcommittee saw different areas of campus, so like athletics, the Stevenson Union as a whole, and educational activities, which is like ASSU, EPIC, that stuff. So when we had to make cuts last year to pay off the deficit, every subcommittee had to come in at a 6% cut. And when some subcommittees have more line items than others, specifically athletics only holding 3 line items, there's no room for anyone to say athletics, you can't take a 6% hit. Like, it's just you have to take the 6% hit and deal with it. And the other subcommittees, we had room to make those. So our process switch that just passed to the Board of Trustees on last Friday is now we just have one committee, and they have the whole year to basically decide how we're going to allocate, but they're not looking at just a few line items per committee, they're looking at the whole picture, because we're expecting to have to make cuts more in the future, and we don't want everyone to be, one committee really struggling and others having like a really easy way to cut. It's just not fair, and it's not fair for part of our student fees to always take that hit if they don't have a choice. So that was really good that it passed through the board, and so we're now going to get started on that. Going with the Transforming General Education Task Force, I have a few people in government who are going to be helping me, and we're going to be hopefully bringing a set of survey questions to ask the students to the task force this Friday. The questions are kind of just along the lines of like, in your experience with your general education, what didn't you like and what would you like to see? I think those are important questions to be asking the students at this time. Again, when we're looking at higher education, there's all types of states are doing now like free community college for your first year and stuff. So it's now a conversation of what is actually going to give a student incentives to come to a 4-year right off the bat and do that general education. What makes our gen ed different from other schools? And I think that direction is 100%, students feeling like it's worth what I'm paying for my gen eds. I'm getting, professional experience, career experience. I'm getting things that I can tell an employer later that this is what I took away from my gen eds, opposed to, yeah, I took a class I paid for it, but I don't really know the skills I got out of it. That's where we want our students to actually walk out of this knowing what to say they took away from their gen ed class, and I think that's, again, a reason students would want to come to university right off the bat, opposed to the community college route, which is an incentive. Another one, just a big one for me in terms of ASSOU is I'm working with Greg and a few others here on the HEC model, the task force that's, redoing the funding model. So we've been kind of gearing up because our first meeting is on Wednesday, and I met with, when the board of trustees was here, I met with Jim, I always butcher his name. Yep, that's it. And we kind of talked about my issues with the, funding model as well as what I'd like to see. The other student representative for the state is a student from OSU Cascade, so we've been working really closely about what we want to see with the funding model. Probably the biggest one is if a student looks at the funding model, they should clearly know why. I know it's a complicated system, I'm not saying it should be A plus B, is why I get this much, but it should be more clear than going through hundreds of documents from the HEC about why SAU is at the bottom 5%. And it's really confusing for a student to try and explain that to other students. Because the first correction is always, tuition went up, not because the school hates you, because we're getting lack of state funding. And then trying to explain, well, why are we getting lack of state funding is not very clear. So our goal for the year is really, at least on my end, to fix that model so I can clearly explain to students why we're getting the bottom 5%. Because at this point, I can't explain it very clearly to the students. So yeah, that's kind of it, and we're kind of just working on that. Another one, just an update, I know we talked about other campuses. It seems every university their student fees are also in a deficit, but I would just make note that when we're talking about funding for each university and where we're all standing higher education-wise, SOU's at a different place than other schools. When I talk to other schools and they tell me they're in a deficit with their student fees, they're also including that I got a new building in Salem, or I got this new program at my school. So if they have enough funds to do that, to build their university, they're not looking, I feel like nobody's paying enough attention to SAU right now, especially in the funding model when it's outcome-based. How can we get those outcomes if we're not being funded to increase our buildings and our programs and different things? So that's our goal with really coming in strong to the HEC or the task force, because then they'll bring it to the HEC. But to really argue that, because it is frustrating from an SAU student standpoint to hear other schools talk about that and no one really understand the SAU regional struggle that we face here. So that's what we're doing to advocate for more state funding and hopefully build SAU up. That's all.
Nice.
Good job.
Any questions for Brittany? I also want to state that Brittany and some of her student colleagues have come into the general education task force and brought a lot of really wonderful insights that have been very helpful to hear the student perspective in my work. All right, so our first regular business item here is a possible motion on the renewing the evaluation task force. I didn't get any further notes via email about changes to be made to the charge. Would anyone like to make a motion?
So moved.
All right, Mark, you made a motion to recharge the student evaluation teaching task force. Do I have a second? All right, Brian. Any further discussion?
Kind of participation.
All right, no discussion? It's gonna be an early day. All right, all those in favor of approving the student evaluation teaching task force for another year? Any opposed? Any abstentions that I did not see? The motion passes. Move right along. Yep.
Are you gonna put this out and call for volunteers then? Is that the next?
Yes, and a few people have, I think all people who were involved the first time, a couple of them have emailed me already saying they would be interested. But I'll send out an email kind of open to everyone who would be interested in volunteering. All right, next, discussion of chair and administrator evaluation process. So we talked a little bit about this last year and a little bit, we came up last week a little bit, but it had come up last year when we found out that there had been a mistake with the chair evaluations. There had been a year missed on the chair evaluations. And looking into how that happened, we also discovered that, in fact, the end on those evaluations are really so low that it actually didn't impact anyone that much not having them. And then we started looking at evaluations of division directors and all the VPs and the president after that. We just really saw that there is a problem across the board with low participation and with the surveys themselves also not necessarily gathering particularly useful feedback. So in advisory council, we did talk at length with Linda and Sue about some of the thoughts that they had about this process. They're free to share. And then we also invited Chris Stanek in to speak a little bit to the response rates. And there are two reports in your drive. One are the 4-year trends for division directors, for the response rate of division directors, and one is the 6-year trend? 5-year trend on all the VPs, provost, and president, and associate provost. Right. So you can sort of see what those response rates have looked like, and have primarily been trending down over the years as well. So, Linda, did either of you want to say something to start the discussion at all?
Glad we're having the discussion. I think I may have said this last time, but our goal is to have a better evaluation process that really helps us get better, just like you want to have with the teaching evaluation process. So a better process from which we can learn, and yeah.
Well, Chris, did you want to say anything about just what your basic findings here?
Yeah, I should first apologize for the chair evals not going out that prior year. That was my oversight. But you are correct. The number of respondents to the chair evals, plus just the size of some of these programs are so small that it's almost ridiculous to consider we make any kind of claims or have any kind of real data about how a chair is doing. When we have a department of size 4 and only one person responds to that, something needs to change as far as using that as a tool to evaluate that chair. It's a little bit better in terms of the end size when it comes to directors, the academic directors, simply because they have multiple programs that they oversee. However, our response rates on those as well are quite small. What we did a couple years ago with the directors' evals is open it up to any faculty across any program, so that if there were split appointments, for instance, or other kind of just more informal kind of interactions between faculty with a director that's not within their area, they would have an opportunity to evaluate that director as well. And so they would self-select if they were going to evaluate, if, say, for instance, you were going to evaluate Dan Knott, for instance. The ends response rates on those, as you can see on that chart, are not impressive. They've been going down for the last number of years. Same with the execs, the provost, the associate provost, the AVP for resource management, as well as in the VPs and the president. There's been some question about who the target audience is for these evaluations. The bylaws are not crystal clear, as you might imagine, as you interact with bylaws for other issues. Traditionally, for the execs, the target population for evals are going to be the professorial, the professional faculty, the year-long adjuncts, excluding the term-by-terms, but then also administrators. So that's another group of 180 or so, but classified are not included in that specifically. although there's some room for interpretation about what the bylaws mean when they say, when they put the word staff in there. So there's a certain nomenclature that has to be interpreted, or language has to be interpreted to determine who is going out. But the group that I just mentioned are traditionally the group that evaluate the execs. Now, there was one year, Linda's first year here actually, in which classified employees were invited to evaluate the president. That was really the only year that happened. It did come up the prior year for Roy Saigo. Some of you remember Roy. And he pushed for that, but for some reason it was either vetoed or just determined that would not be appropriate, since we had not been doing that historically. Why we've been classified, I'm not sure. I don't have the memory back to 2016-17, that year that Linda's eval went out. But it really didn't affect the response rates anyway. It added another couple hundred people to the invite, but it didn't affect the response rates. So we still had low response rates. Another point, Andrew, that I'd like to make is you mentioned the quality of the questions. A number of years ago, the FPC, the Faculty Personnel Committee, spent quite a bit of time. Some of you may have been even on that committee at that point, in redesigning all of the questions for all of the executive evaluations. And so the survey eval was shortened considerably at that point, much more targeted on certain areas. I think it reduced from something like 29 questions down to 15, if I'm not mistaken. That has not happened with the director's eval. There's been no rewrite or editing or for the chair eval. They only took on the executive eval. Seems like there was one other thing. Oh, remember that the president's eval is every other year. It's not every year. And then the other ambiguity of the bylaws is who is the target for an eval when it comes to executives, quote unquote. And what we do is the AVP, Karen Stone's position for academic resource management is included. The associate provost is, like I said, the provost and then all the other VPs. But we've had a number of other AVPs on board in years past, Mark Demi, for instance, for budget, and he was not included in that list of who is to be evaluated, who is not. I think that's everything I have. Any questions? Yes.
Well, this isn't really a question, it's a comment, but, well, yeah, no, I'll frame it as a question. I'm remembering a discussion we had at the advisory council, and I believe it was, it might have been Sue, said that one of the things that might be a problem is just timing. So my question is, am I right in remembering these come out in May?
The bylaws state spring.
Spring.
Is it?
So I guess my thought piece for all of this might be, that's a time when we seem to be piled up with a lot of other things. That probably drops to the bottom or lower on many people's lists, honestly, at that time of year, but it might be something we could affect response rate and engagement, taking a better time.
Would be more experiment.
This is
Yeah,
it.
I mean,
But
that's
I think another factor in the, you don't ever get to find out what you said. And, right now, I think the feedback we get is so, unhopeful that it just doesn't even seem like we want to share it out, right? I mean, because it's just all over the math and stuff. So ideally, what I'd like to get to is a process that feels fair and helpful. And then I think some kind of reporting out to the campus, at least on the presidential level, would help people feel like, yeah, I want to do this because I know something is happening with this. I mean, I can tell you that the survey results went to the board and they reviewed them and it, but that's as much as you get at this point, so.
I'll speak to myself. When I get these, there's not much interaction that I have with a lot of these individuals. at all. And I know, you know, many of them that might meet at Senate or talk in Senate, but I still participate in them, and some of the questions I leave blank. But it seems that if you're speaking to the target audience, I know you'd like to hear from faculty, but I think a lot of faculty may not just have as many interactions. Like, for example, I'll just use, you know, Janet for VP of Development. I know what she does. I can't judge how well she's doing it. I have nothing to compare it to. So if I get something, you know, for the Vice President of Development, I don't know how I can answer that honestly and provide feedback that she might be looking for to help her job. And so, that's all I got, really. I mean, I can't comment on something I don't have a strong opinion about.
It raises a good point. I mean, is it appropriate to ask everybody to evaluate all of these individuals? Or should we think more about which ones you can most appropriately evaluate?
There was one question on it's at the beginning of every one of the executive evals, which asks you to identify how often you have interactions with a particular individual. But what we have not done is any kind of analysis saying, you know, for instance, those that say 0 through 5, it's a scale of 1 to 10, 0 through 5, the results are this versus those that have 6 through 10 kind of interactions with the individual. We haven't gone down that deep in terms of analysis.
I think that would be interesting. I think the opportunity for everyone to give an evaluation should still remain, but then what do you do with it is a different question. Because if you take it away from some people, I'm sure that this is the only opportunity they have to give a comment. I'm not saying they would, but I don't know what you do with the actual data once you have it, how much you can dig into 100 response when there's 400 and some that went out.
Well, the other thing that we don't do with the data is code the qualitative statements. But as far as the quantitative and qualitative, both sets of data do go back to the supervisor of that VP, for instance, Linda, for all the VPs, or to Sue for the associate provost or the AVP for resource management. I believe the bylaws state that it, excuse me, that it is the duty of the FPC to designate, or maybe it's the Senate to designate a individual that then delivers, analyzes, or somehow evaluates the results overall, and then has a sit down with the individual. Maybe that's only for the president.
It's just the president.
But I'm not involved in that, so I don't provide the designee that the faculty senate has with any kind of claims or analysis about the results. I'm kind of just the guy in the back end that's pulling levers and making sure that they go out.
Wizard, Chris.
Except for the chair.
You know, I don't know if this is an exact parallel one, but it'd be almost like asking all faculty, all students to evaluate you as a faculty member, or at least all students with a major in your area, even if they've never had you in class. That's how it feels sometimes. So like with Janet, one thing we've started doing, if you've been to any of the big, like the opening breakfast, closing breakfast, I've asked her to at least present results on what they're doing so that people have some idea. But if you aren't at one of those things, you don't even have that little bit. So how would you feel about being evaluated by students you've never had in class? Or couldn't pick you out of a lineup, you know? I don't know. So I'm sure there are better ways. That's what we want to look at, or better ways to do this.
I'm remembering one other thing that came up in our discussion advisory council, and this won't be novel, but in the sort of spirit of Brian's question about how well do we evaluate tours, whoever they are, and know the role and the job and how much interaction. Similarly, it might be helpful if we did our process in such a way that there was at least a thumbnail sketch of exactly where whoever's being asked to evaluate, where does your piece fit into a little bit of a larger picture? We're talking about some of this here right now, kind of pretty well set out for the president. There's more to it for the president and the bylaws than others, but just a sense of, okay, this is step 13, and I'm kidding a little bit, but just a sense of what the role of the evaluation is, where does it go from there, how is it used, whatever.
Sue, you spoke about that in the past, a little bit about, for instance, when the division director evaluations go to you, you have a process, how you work with them on that, right? They don't get the
Well,
results.
I just synthesize the information from the qualitative and quantitative data points and then ask them, although I missed some last year, I ask them to do a self-evaluation and then I do an evaluation, so I just triangulate those three pieces of information and then ask them to set some goals for the upcoming year, and that's the same with the other two reports. But the ends are very small, even on the division director, some divisions. It's, I do the best I can. The ends are bigger for the associate provost
And this is not a criticism of the current system, it's just hoping to try to make it better. I think if people understood a little bit like, okay, my evaluation of it, I'll pick on you for a second, the provost, does that just go to her and she reads it and it's done? Or, we certainly know that's not true, but, you know, if people say, okay, not only will this Sue see it, but the president will see it, I would hope people would then say, okay, how can I be useful and constructive rather than just, I'm mad at Sue because you didn't do my search, or, you know, I thought Sue was great because she gave my colleague a bunch of money to, you know, whatever. I'm just sort of mouthing off here, but if it was understood that it was going to be used to help make goals and to, you know, go forward, I think people might have a little bit more willingness to participate, and hopefully, I mean, we talked about this in advisory council too, that nothing stings more than getting a stack of student evals and then getting that one that just says, you know, you're terrible, or you're mean to me, or whatever. And I don't know how we can ever remove that, but anything that we can do to sort of say, well, let's at least balance this out with constructive things to help us make goals and get better, that's what evaluation should be about.
To speak a little bit from experience on this, so I was the student designee for Linda's process, which is confidential, so I won't share any of the details, except to say that, you know, Sue and I had to come up with recommendations from that feedback. And even though the quantitative data was actually quite positive, the comments were really not useful for drawing any significant conclusions. There were a lot of sort of, you know, high fives in there, but also just any constructive, there's very little constructive feedback. It was sometimes just, again, it felt very familiar to finding that one student response that was just, you know, a dagger. And rather than being things that actually said, you know, here's what you can do better. And so I think it is a broken process.
So I called up the bylaws. It's April. It says vice presidents and other executive administrators as appropriate shall be evaluated annually during the month of April. But then the following thing, it says the advisory evaluation form shall be prepared and distributed by the FPC in cooperation with the university president. So I don't know, the faculty personnel committee is that a Senate, and by the way, I don't know when this section of the bylaws was updated online. I don't think we discussed this at all last year. So I don't know if this is the newest iteration of the bylaws, but, you know, to kind of piggyback on kind of what Kimball and everyone is saying, you know, I don't know what Senate can do, because we
They're not a
have,
Senate committee.
they're not the
They're
Senate committee.
not, and you can't be on FPC and
In
be on
Senate.
Senate, in fact.
Well, we can't change the bylaws. The bylaws we have to do.
So I guess that would be the question, if we still want, you know, the university, because it is generic on here, the questions that we ask, just kind of is receptive to suggestions in council, administers the area of responsibility, of, you know, efficiently and fairly. And so that's kind of hard to gauge if you don't know the individual part.
Which one were you looking at?
It's 2 under university. For advisory evaluation of the president's executive council and other executive administrators.
Thank you.
And so it is, I don't know if that's what you're asking us to do, Andrew, is to reevaluate the bylaws, just what we're asking. Then again, I'm not an administrator, so I don't know what feedback that you would really, that would be most beneficial to those administrators. I mean, all of them sound great, that they should be receptive. You know, they should administer their area of responsibility efficiently and fairly. I mean, they're vague.
Well, actually, what I think would be useful is if we go through a process somewhat like you went through when you looked at teaching evaluations, and we we do a little research and we talk to some other institutions about the kinds of instruments they use and when, and you know, just do what we do about everything else. Let's do some research and then we can come forward with some suggestions or recommendations, or you can, or we can work it together. But I mean, we shouldn't just try to sit here and come up with it. We ought to go outside and see what other people are doing. When I was a dean, I did this, and my professional organization actually had worked on this quite a bit and had some recommended language and stuff for questions. So I'm sure it's out there for presidents, just like it's probably out there for deans. We haven't looked at it. Nobody's taken a look at this in a while.
So I guess, you know, what I'm asking is, you know, the president and division directors and the provosts have all come to advisory council and said, this is a process that isn't particularly beneficial, it's not working well, and but we have to keep doing it unless the bylaws change, right? And so my question is, do we want to take this up and figure out a process by which we come up with a better system and change those bylaws? And that's not my say.
The only thing I'd like to add that I haven't said yet is that if the intent, the research question here, is an evaluation of the execs and other leaders of the campus, it's odd to me from a social science research kind of perspective that such a large portion of the employee workforce are excluded, the classified staff. I don't quite understand that, except for maybe the fact that these are defined within faculty bylaws, and so it is the faculty to get to decide that. But I think that should be considered. Classified staff interact quite a bit with some of these same people. And then the other piece is, if we're looking for higher response rates, clearly we need to redesign the survey questions. Length is not good for getting strong response rates. They need to be shorter. They need to be more succinct. So how anybody translated who it was, how many years ago, I'm not sure, those particular bullet points that Brian was just reading into the 15, 20 questions that are, I'm not sure. That was before my time.
There's eight
bullet
criteria
points,
in what
but
you're supposed to, so I don't understand where the other 20 questions, how we get to 20 when there's only 8, you know.
Yeah.
And the 8th one is just overall assessment as,
That one still exists.
you know, very effective to ineffective, and insufficient information to evaluate is one of the other options it says in there. The only other disclaimer that I would say, and this probably goes to, is it says vice president and other executive administrators as appropriate shall be evaluated annually. I don't know how we define as appropriate.
That's why it's put in there.
I mean, is it as needed or is it annually? I mean, I don't know what would be beneficial to the vice presidents, if it's an annual one, or, you know, if I don't know why the president is only biannually, whereas everyone else is annually. All right, sorry, I quit asking questions. This is where cookies come into play.
It seems to me we're
Sorry,
asking,
Sarah.
you know, a couple of different things. We want an evaluation that's actually effective and allows us to move forward with different, or do we want more evaluation, more response, and things like that. And I was thinking back on, early on, when I got here, which was a long time ago, I had something called a SKID evaluation in a couple of my classes, and they were awesome. So much more thorough than a class evaluation by students at the end of the term. And it was where somebody came in, and sort of a neutral party, and met with the students, and I didn't come to class for the first half of the class, and they talked about it. We had some formalized questions and had a discussion, and then that person wrote up a report, which was then provided to the instructor. It was like, wow, I had no idea that I could do that and it would have this effect in the classroom. It was awesome. I was just sitting here as we were having this conversation thinking, why don't we do some sort of a SKID evaluation or propose something like that? Maybe not every year, it would be a lot of work if we could put together to form that committee, but actually sit down and have a conversation about, and people in the know, so it's not, you know, somebody just grabbing something out of the air, and knowing it's coming forward and saying, okay, let's go out and have a conversation with our colleagues. so that we can bring to the table some information that can be used for skid type evaluation. And that would really take a major rewrite of the bylaws. But if we're, you know, if we're looking at doing something effective and meaningful, rather than just another Likert scale, we could have it be like the all-campus question. Rate this president against all other presidents you've known. You've been here 1 year, you've got one, you're gonna get a 7.
Just to back up what Michael's saying, I mean, the Outdoor Adventure Leaders Department, that's all we do. It is every trip we do, every night, we are doing assessments and debriefs. And you have to build it in part of your culture. The culture here is like, oh, it's a quick little, you know, something you send out, and then how much, you know, we don't even know if people are actually going to do anything with it. You have to create the time and space to actually honor the evaluation process, and then people get bought into it. And then you have to create the time and space to actually look at it and make a plan. And so we have, like in our master's program, we have an entire fall semester quarter that is just an entire fall of evaluation. That's all we do. There's a whole quarter dedicated to it, because we just had all this experience. When we do our international expedition, we come back and we have a whole quarter to talk about the experience. When we come back from a trip, we come back by noon, because we're not coming back at 5, and then we're gonna go in there and, like, you know, do some kind of little debrief. No, we have 5 hours now to talk about the process that we went through. It's just classic experiential education. It's part of the experiential learning curve and or the learning cycle, and if you don't set it aside, which we classically don't, it's something we kind of tag on at the end, you're not gonna get buy-in. It's just this little thing that you do at the end, and and you just, you know, a couple of stabs here and there, but we don't actually end up doing anything with this a lot of times. So it's just part of what we do over there all the time, and you have to build that culture around it.
So, is there anyone who opposes doing something like this? Everybody seems open to finding a solution. Okay, so we're good on that. It seems to me that it might be a good idea to find a few faculty who want to work with a few administrators together on a collaborative solution that could be brought to Senate.
And I would recommend, following up on what Chris said, you know, broaden the conversation, bring in folks from all aspects of the campus life that interact with the folks we're trying to evaluate.
Melissa, do you want the name of that acronym, the full, it's small group instructional diagnostic?
I couldn't remember.
Well, I'm not trying to make you look bad, I'm just,
That's okay.
thinking that people will look at that acronym and go, SKID.
It might be SKID.
It's SGID.
I know I think there's probably some task force fatigue, there's so many task forces, but I do think there's another thing where it's probably better to have a smaller group working on something before, I don't think we're going to solve it in this message. All right, well, I'll work on an idea around that, and something like that. Okay, move on? All right, next up, this also was an issue that came up in an advisory council. Dennis has been banging the drum for a while on getting a, thank you, Chris. That, we have these distinguished teaching and service awards, but not a one for research and creativity, or creative activity. And I think it was Kimball and our advisory council meeting said, well, let's just do it. And we kind of realized, oh yeah, I guess we pretty much could just do it. And actually, then his suggestion was, let's make faculty development committee do it. Which was even a better. So basically, what we wanted to ask you all, because we were talking about the process where the other 2 awards got developed, and it was this kind of a long chain of things, but I don't think it actually has to be that complicated. And I did reach out to Brett, who is the chair of that committee, and he did, there was no kicking and screaming when I mentioned this to him. So basically what we wanted to do is just ask you all, do we as Senate feel comfortable sort of asking the Faculty Development Committee, using the teaching award and the service award as a model, bring us a proposal for a research and creative activity Anyone think that sounds like a good idea? That's pretty much that discussion then.
No, I have some information.
Oh, yeah, please.
When this came up last year, it was recommended at the time that Carol Ferguson said that Hollis Shipman was sort of leading the charge on the other two.
It was the X Factor group.
The X Factor, but she was part of that, right?
She is part of it.
Yeah. And so I reached out to her, and she was interested in participating. And then, based on our conversation here, maybe 1 or 2 meetings ago, I reached out to her again to say that the sentiment seemed to be supportive of the idea, and would she be interested in basically doing what she did for those others?
She didn't single-handedly do it.
The X Factor.
There was a group of about
Yes.
4 or 5 people.
But she's been the only one that responded to me, so I have to use her name. And so, she said that that group would be interested, and that they were gonna talk to Sue recently about it?
I had not not been contacted.
Okay.
So would it be that group instead of the faculty development?
Well, that's what I'm saying, you know, I don't
So
know.
they turned it over to the faculty
Yeah.
development committee, so they did some initial work.
When was that?
3 years ago. when
Oh.
they
Talking about the
first-
original.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the original conversation started with the X Factor group, and then at some point, it was turned over to the faculty development committee to create the process for nominations and decisions
Right,
and recommendations.
right.
So they had the idea, they came to me, I was supportive, we talked about what that would look like, and then turned it over to FTC so that they could take it forward. But that was creating the very first award, which was teaching, out of nothing. The second one, which was service, was much easier to create because we already had a template for the first one. So I think the FTC now has a pretty good process that they could just, rinse and repeat. I'm talking about the process, not the criteria, obviously. And I think they would be welcome an ask. And I
Yeah,
would tell
the
them.
reason why I mention it is because she said that they wanted to meet with you at your earliest convenience or something. That was about a week or so. So I was just wondering if they had
No, I
done that.
haven't.
I can chime in on this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I take
Oh,
X
yes.
Factor.
You were on it. Yeah.
So I'm also on FDIC. I think we just felt like this should happen. X Factor just felt like this should happen.
Well, and the
We were
faculty
happy to
rewards
do it.
committee.
But I'm also on FDIC, and I think that's fine if we do it through the faculty development committee. X Factor just wanted to make sure it happened. It's not that we feel like ownership over this. We just wanted to make sure that someone did it. The only thing that I would add to that, and that was what we were planning on talking to you, Sue, was just to find out what the
Sure.
next steps
And again, I
were.
think Paul did a good job of presenting a similar amount of support from the faculty rewards group as well. I'm happy to have the conversation.
So the only thing I wanted to add to that is because we had sort of separately envisioned something like an award with some of our X Factor meetings last year, which I think we might have mentioned to you when we met over the summer, but the only thing that we got from faculty when we were talking about it was that a lot of faculty really feel like, an award is wonderful, but what we really want is time to do research and or funding to go somewhere to present it or to collect data or whatever. I know that's obviously a bigger.
It's a different conversation.
Right, it's a different conversation, but I did want to kind of speak to that as being the challenge that a lot of faculty felt with doing research or having, maybe the possibility of a competitive award that included some ability to continue doing the research or to start doing the research as opposed to after the research is completed and published.
Yeah.
So I feel like this is gonna happen. Okay, let me just say that, and it should happen. The next question is, the Service and Teaching Award, which I think the nominations are due to you by November 1st. I imagine that this award would not be at the end of the year breakfast if we do a service, but I think that we should try, no? To have this award solidified with applications going.
this year?
For this year, why not?
Interesting.
There's already a template, as Sue said, for teaching
Yeah.
and for service, and if faculty personnel or not faculty,
There's a
faculty
process.
development committee.
They'd have to develop a template because it's a different set of criteria.
Because I know when Dennis brought this up at a Senate meeting last spring, I sent email notes to the social science division, and I had 2 people wanting to apply for it right then and there. I said, it doesn't exist right now.
There's no criteria. But you can
But they were willing to, you know, do it, and so I'm saying, if we would like to get this done by the end of the year and give faculty development committee the time to go through the application, this is probably something that should be done in haste, maybe.
Well, faculty development's meeting on Wednesday.
So I just want to make sure that people understand that somebody at some group, and I don't know who that is, need to look at section 5 of the bylaws and really study closely what that set of criteria should look like for this award. So is it publications, is it, you know, I don't know what that is, but I think just like the service and teaching folks did, there's a process in place, so that won't take as much time. I think you can just follow the process, but there has to be some conversation about what would constitute.
Yeah, the criteria.
That's right.
I think it's conceivable. You know, last year, I was a term behind asking for the nominations, and we still got through the whole process, so. I think, but I also wouldn't want to put the FTC under too much pressure. I feel like if they felt like they could come up with a proposal by the end of this term, then I think within 2 terms, it's possible that we could award something by spring. But if they felt they needed more time, I'd also want them to feel like they could do that.
I just want to say that's not the only thing they have to do.
No, they got Carpenter
So
2 grants
they've got-
coming up.
Yeah, they've got Carpenter 2s and they've got PDG, there's a lot that goes through faculty development, so,
And they have the other 2 awards.
right, and 2 awards, so there might be a little.
Oh, we can ask. It goes to a good thing. They do a great work, and and it's rewarding faculty, and it's,
Well,
segue.
I wonder if in the conversation about awarding the scholarship or with the criteria for it, whether the possibility exists to separate scholarship and creativity.
It's creative activity. and
Because
it's-
there's so many creative folks that, might not fall under that nomenclature typically that are, and since we have that as one of our university goals, to maybe foster that.
It's used differently,
Visibly,
Dennis.
yeah.
In the promotion and tenure section of 5, it's actually called out for folks who are in the arts who may not be doing traditional scholarship
Right,
in the
I
research.
remember that, yeah.
Yeah, so it has a particular meaning in the promotion and tenure process, not just creative, but it's very specific for our colleagues who don't do straight-on social science or
Yeah.
scientific research.
Okay, I was just wondering, since they might be disadvantaged.
Well, I think it would all go down to what the criteria are, which I assume would have to follow.
And if we were
SUSA's
designing
bylaws.
something, what would be our ideal, maybe, I was just thinking it fell in line with one of our university goals. It's an emphasis that maybe is not so visibly rewarded.
You could give a creative and innovative sort of award, but the use of creative activity is very specific to promotion and tenure. And I'm looking around for somebody in the OCA to help me here, because it's quite specific in terms of how you use it for your research.
Right, for us, a CD is a publication.
Correct, thank you. If Dave Bethel were here, he would have another example of how that would look in his area.
Well, and concerts.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah.
So I think as long as the group that reviews these things would have just fair criteria that show that.
Well, I was gonna say, the group has discretion to award multiple awards, because Michael and Kemba shared the service award. Last year, I think Precious and Emily Reeder shared the teaching award.
The
So
teaching award, you
Up
can
to
award
2.
up to 4 for teaching and up to 2 for
Teaching is
service.
4, service is 2.
So if we
So we
award
could
up
do-
to 2 for the scholarship/creative activity,
That is an excellent.
problem solved. Let's get it done, no.
All right, well, I'll reach
I
out
say
to
no to
them
being a part of it,
again.
say yes to too many things.
Next up on the agenda, we had just a little bit of time, opportunity, if anyone did have any further feedback from your programs on the faculty rewards report. I believe Paul had said that he was interested in helping to collect that feedback and synthesize it into further action potentially. So had any interesting conversations in your programs about that report?
No, I just thought you were gonna ask, you were gonna explain how people give
Oh. Well, Paul, how do you want to do that?
Well, we had talked about feedback going from the chair's programs to Patrick, and then that would come.
And then we would feed it, we had an offline conversation after the last meeting, we talked about this.
Okay.
Paul said that he would be happy to be sort of the point person. If you could direct it to Patrick in my office, he could collate it and then get it to the group that worked on it through Paul.
And I volunteered as somebody on the Senate who was
Yep.
in that original team,
Yep.
just to continue to represent it.
Okay, so you're asking for the program chairs to send it to Patrick?
Yeah.
Never mind.
But I don't want to stop you from talking about it now if you want to.
Well, main question was, if I had asked everyone to look at in terms of were there specific things that Senate could be acting upon within those recommendations that people wanted to pursue.
So you were wondering specifically what Senate could look at
Right.
versus what might be in the collective bargaining
Right,
agreement.
right. I know one was the FPAR work, although the FPAR task force is going to be looking at some of those things anyway. I don't know if there were other things that people noted that they. Like not right now. If anything comes up, hopefully you know me. All right, well, with that, any announcements or new business?
November 1st, the chemistry club is going to put on a demo show called Fall into Chemistry. We're going to have a lot of kids in from the community to watch, have some kids from Ashland High, and theme this year is Marvelous Metals. So we're going to have a lot of metals going up in flames in very colorful fashions.
You blow stuff up, weren't you?
Yeah. So 3:30 to 5:30, there's an intermission, November 1st, in the Science Building. I think that's 115, the auditorium when you walk in.
Looking at Sherry, we just had a conversation about
It's like yeah.
New regulations going on November 2nd.
Yeah. All appropriate safety controls in place.
I have a little bit of new business I wanted to ask you all about. Because right before the meeting, I looked at the new catering bill, which I thought might have gone down more than it did for not having cookies and fruit. And also looking around and seeing only 3 coffee cups at the table. That set up there was $62.
Kill it.
Kill it.
Should we just get rid of it?
Get rid of it.
How much are cookies?
Bring the cookies back.
It's 62 over the cookies.
Like some other meetings, we could all volunteer to bake one.
I was trying to be sensitive to people coming late to a meeting and wanting some coffee, but it's just $62 just feels like a bad investment right now. So if everyone's okay with that.
How much are cookies, please?
What would it be to get cookies?
Okay. I hear the ask about cookies. I'll go back and look at how much there is.
Switch the cookies out.
Keep the
Bring
coffee.
drinks anyway.
Alright. Any other announcements or new business?
It's homecoming this weekend.
All week there's stuff, there's a parade on Saturday, there's a lot going on.
Big game on Saturday.
So we're hosting a conference on Latin American and Iberian studies here at SOU on April. So if somebody's interested, we have already a couple of papers out there, just let me know. It's pretty cool. It's regional conference, so universities from the Pacific Northwest are coming around, we're expecting around 100 professors.
I missed when, where? When?
In April, it's gonna be here.
Okay.
So I'm organizing it. So
You're looking for submissions?
if you want to, we're open, yeah, totally. And we want to attract different disciplines and, you know, as long as it's related to memory and aviation studies. We're cool.
Is there a place people can go to look at the criteria?
Oh, sure, I'll send you the call.
Okay.
Mhm.
Any other announcements?
I'll send, yeah.
All right, well, we say 10 minutes. That's a great time.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the thing is like, I don't know exactly who's doing that American studies or